Karens on cruise ships love making everyone else miserable, and I can't say I'm surprised when that same behavior got them killed. Hi, it's Timothy. Today, I'm going through 6 disasters waiting to happen. From a 400-pound Karen falsifying her weight just to parasail, to a Karen who paddled right into a swarm of jellyfish and found out the hard way what those tentacles do. It was June 14, 2019, and the ship had docked at Cozumel just after 7 a.m. The parasailing concession ran out of a small marina about 10 minutes from port. A solid operation, been running the same excursion off the same dock for 15 years. No serious incidents on record. Marguerite Hollis was 61, a retired school administrator from Akron, Ohio, traveling solo on a 9-day Western Caribbean cruise. She had booked the parasailing excursion 4 days out, paid in full, and on the online waiver she listed her weight as 200 pounds. The operator's equipment was rated for a maximum solo passenger weight of 275 pounds, not a guideline, but the actual engineering limit everything on that rig was built around. Marguerite Hollis weighed 402 pounds. That figure came from the medical examiner. I just know this story isn't going to end well the moment that waiver comes up. Parasailing weight limits are not suggestions. Once a passenger goes past them, the harness and tow line start handling forces they were never built for, especially once the wind picks up. The lead operator clocked the discrepancy within 30 seconds of her arriving at the dock. He asked if the listed weight was current and requested she step onto the dock scale, standard procedure for solo passengers. Marguerite immediately took the request personally. She accused the staff of trying to embarrass her publicly, reminded them she had already paid $180 for the excursion, and repeatedly talked over attempts to explain the policy. By the end of the exchange, she was threatening a detailed complaint review if they refused to launch her. He made one more attempt, warning her that the wind was already at 18 knots and still rising, and that overloaded parasailing harnesses in those conditions could fail without much warning. Marguerite dismissed it as scare tactics. She insisted she had parasailed before and demanded they finish gearing her up. Later, neither operator could explain why they didn't just walk her back to the shuttle. The lead operator let her through. The harness fitting was a problem from the start. Nothing fit. The chest and leg loops maxed out well short of closing, and when the second operator went to get an extension strap, Marguerite asked loudly why this was taking so long. The strap she came back with was an auxiliary extension strap normally reserved for borderline tandem adjustments, not overloaded solo launches in worsening wind. The lead operator knew what it was and said nothing. The spreader bar rode up toward her chin because the geometry was completely wrong, and when the second operator tried adjusting it, Marguerite grabbed her wrist and told her it was fine and to stop fussing. They launched at 9:47 a.m. Wind was reading 18 knots. The ascent went sideways almost immediately. At around 60 feet, a gust pushed the canopy hard left, and the operator throttled up to compensate, loading the harness attachment points hard. The extension strap at the left shoulder audibly popped. The second operator heard it from the deck, but held. At 90 feet, the canopy briefly stabilized. Then a harder gust hit from the northwest. The line went slack for 2 seconds and snapped taut as the canopy reinflated. That shock load on a compromised harness carrying more than twice its rated weight was the end of the sequence. The lead operator called for emergency descent. The boat slowed, the canopy lost lift, and she dropped faster than the procedure was designed to handle. She hit the water somewhere between 35 and 45 miles per hour. Feet first, then immediate full-body lateral impact as the canopy dragged her sideways. Both operators were in after her within seconds. She was face down and not moving. They got her onto the boat and started CPR. She was pronounced dead at 10:48 a.m. Blunt force trauma, drowning as a secondary factor. 7 ribs fractured on the right side. 2 displaced inward, right lung collapsed. The investigation found the falsified waiver weight as the origin point of every failure that followed. The wrongful death claim filed by her family the following year was dismissed. The lead operator kept his license. The concession kept running. What happened in Cozumel started with a falsified waiver and ended with a harness that failed under stress. In Roatan, the warning was much simpler. Wear the helmet, stay with the group, and slow down before the curve. It was March 24th, 2015, and the ship had docked at Roatan, Honduras just after 7 a.m. Roatan is a narrow, hilly island off the northern coast of Honduras, covered in dense brush with red clay soil through the interior. The trail this group used ran along a hillside, packed dirt and loose gravel with sharp switchbacks, steep drops on the outer edge, and nothing in the way of barriers or guardrails. Deb Felker was 54, a retired office manager from Scottsdale, Arizona. She had booked the cruise alone as a personal trip after her youngest kid moved out. The ATV excursion was one of 3 shore activities she had pre-booked before leaving port. She liked doing things her own way and didn't really like being told otherwise. On her waiver, she listed mild hypertension. ATV excursions in Honduran port towns were a standard cruise offering by 2015, mostly run by third-party operators with inconsistent safety enforcement. Loose gravel over compacted clay kills traction fast, especially mid-turn, and at anything above 20 miles per hour, a rear-wheel slide is hard to pull back even for experienced riders. Most of these trails had unguarded outer edges, zero-speed monitoring, and once the group was moving, the guide was essentially the only line of safety out there. The excursion launched around 9 a.m. with about 12 passengers. The guide handed out helmets and ran through the mandatory briefing, covering speed limits, turn technique, and staying in formation. Deb refused the helmet on the first offer, saying it was too tight. He brought a larger size. She tried it on but said it was uncomfortable, so she set it down. He told her it was required. She told him she had done this kind of thing before. He wrote her name on his clipboard, noted the refusal, and the group set off. She rode near the back for the first half mile, then started creeping forward. She pulled up alongside the guide twice, asking to lead. He told her the front was his. On the third approach, she didn't ask. She just punched the throttle past him on a flat stretch and kept going. The guide called after her to slow down, but she kept going. And honestly, at that point, what was he supposed to do? Chase her down on an ATV? About 1.2 miles in, the trail bent sharply left around a hillside curve, loose gravel over clay, the outer edge dropping into brush with nothing to stop you if you drifted wide. The guide always slowed the group to a crawl there. Based on skid marks measured afterward, Deb was doing somewhere between 28 and 32 miles per hour going into that turn. The rear wheels broke loose first. Then the front right wheel caught a rock and the ATV lurched hard, throwing her forward and to the left. She covered around 18 feet before her left temple came down on the gravel. She didn't go out right away. Riders behind her saw her push herself partway up before her arms gave out. The guide reached her in about 40 seconds. She was breathing, but not responding to her name or to touch. There was a thin line of blood from her left ear, and her pupils were unequal. She lost consciousness fully within 4 minutes and never regained it. The guide radioed for help right away. It still took local emergency responders 34 minutes to reach that section of trail. That's just the reality of where they were. She was taken to a medical facility in Roatan, where the ship's medical team had already been notified. She was too unstable to move by air. She died 9 hours after the impact. Her family was notified through the cruise line that evening. The post-mortem was straightforward. Acute subdural hematoma on the left hemisphere, significant midline shift caused by rupture of the middle meningeal artery at the point of impact. No underlying condition, nothing pre-existing. Just an unprotected head hitting hard ground at speed. The guide's clipboard, including her name, both helmet refusals, all documented before the group left the staging area, ended up being the central piece of the civil review that followed. The operator wasn't found negligent. In the months after, the Excursion added a helmet check tied directly to the ignition. The ATV physically won't start until the guide confirms the helmet is on the rider's head. Simple fix. But would Deb have worn it anyway? Aboard a cruise ship crossing the Gulf of Mexico, another passenger made the exact same mistake with something far less visible: the combination of prescription pills and whatever the bar kept pouring into her glass. It was February 11th, 2014, and the ship was 3 days into a 7-day Western Caribbean itinerary, roughly 190 miles southwest of New Orleans in the Gulf of Mexico. No port stop that day, just open water and the kind of easy, do-nothing atmosphere that sea days tend to have. Renata's cabin was an interior stateroom on Deck 7 with no window or balcony, which meant no natural light and no way to tell what time it was once the lights were off. Renata Solis was 61, a retired insurance broker from Tampa, Florida, traveling with 4 friends for a group retirement celebration. She had been dealing with chronic back pain and anxiety for several years and was on 2 prescriptions going into the trip: diazepam for the anxiety and oxycodone for the pain. According to her friends, she was the loudest and most social one of the group, the one who set the pace and didn't really take no for an answer when she wanted another round. By the first evening, she had already claimed a spot at the main bar and was there most of the night. Renata's friends had learned early on that telling her to slow down was a waste of breath, so no one really tried anymore. She had been drinking heavily from the first night. By the second evening, a bar crew member noticed she looked heavily sedated while still actively drinking. Glassy eyes, slow speech, out of it in a way that went beyond just needing sleep. He asked if she was okay and mentioned that some medications don't mix well with alcohol. She told him she knew her own body and that he should worry about his other customers. He flagged it with his supervisor afterward. The next day, one of her friends stopped by the medical bay for seasickness medication and mentioned offhandedly that Renata had been drinking heavily and seemed to be on some kind of prescription, pill bottles on the nightstand. More out of it than usual. The medical staff sent an officer to her cabin that afternoon. She answered the door in her robe, told him she was just tired and needed to sleep it off, and when he started explaining why he was there, she cut him off, said she didn't need a crew member at her door telling her how to manage her own health. He left a written advisory under her door outlining the risks and asked her to come in if anything felt off. There is no record of her visiting the medical bay after that. On the morning of the 5th day, Renata didn't show for the group's planned breakfast. Her friends figured she had overslept. It wouldn't have been the first time on this trip. By 11 a.m., she still hadn't answered knocks or the cabin phone. One of her friends tried calling twice from the corridor, then went to the front desk and asked for a welfare check. The crew member went to her cabin at around 11:20 a.m., knocked twice, and announced himself, and when nobody answered, he used a master key to enter. Renata was on her back on the bed, fully clothed and completely still. An empty wine glass on the nightstand, both prescription bottles open beside it. The medical team was called immediately. She had no pulse and wasn't breathing. They worked on her for 25 minutes and couldn't revive her. The cabin was completely undisturbed, with nothing knocked over or out of place and no sign of any distress. She had gone to sleep and never woke up. Based on her body temperature at discovery, the medical team put the time of death somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m. The captain was notified and her body was moved to the ship's medical facility. Her 4 travel companions were told together in person by a senior crew member. The ship continued its itinerary and local authorities came aboard at the next port to formally document the scene. Her family in Tampa was notified through the cruise line that same afternoon. Her belongings were packed by crew and held until they could be collected. Toxicology confirmed diazepam, oxycodone, and ethanol all present in her system. None at an individually fatal level, but combined they were a different story. The three together amplify each other's effect on the central nervous system, and at a certain combined concentration, the brain simply stops regulating breathing. Manner of death was ruled accidental. The coroner's notes flagged one detail. The written advisory was found on the cabin floor, still folded, unread. Two of her friends later told investigators they had no idea what medications she was on, and that if they had known, they would have said something sooner. The bar crew members' interaction and the medical officer's visit were both documented in the official record. No findings were made against the cruise line. Some people are just not going to hear it, no matter who's saying it or how many times. In Belize, a woman who had spent most of the previous night sick and dehydrated decided that a hike into a humid jungle cave was still a perfectly reasonable idea. It was September 8, 2015, and the ship had docked at Belize City just after 7 a.m. The cave system was several miles inland, reached by a 40-minute bus ride and a hike through dense jungle. The tour route ran about 1,100 feet into the cave, narrow in some sections, wide open in others. No natural light passed the first chamber, and humid enough that you were sweating the whole way through regardless of the 72 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. Claudette Charles was 58, a property manager from Memphis, Tennessee, on a 9-day cruise with her husband, who had skipped the excursion in favor of staying on the ship. She had been managing mild hypertension for several years and took a low-dose diuretic every morning as part of that. The previous evening, she had started feeling nauseous and had been up most of the night with loose stools and vomiting. She told her husband it was probably something she ate at dinner and that she would be fine by morning. By morning, she was not fine, but a little vomiting was apparently not enough to change her plans. That morning, the ship had posted a norovirus advisory in common areas and at the excursion desk, asking anyone with stomach symptoms to skip group shore activities for the day. Claudette walked past it on her way to the bus. The excursion launched around 8:30 a.m. with a group of about 14 passengers. At the staging area, the guide asked if anyone was feeling unwell, standard protocol given the advisory posted that morning. Claudette said she hadn't paid good money to be turned away at the door over a little nausea. On the bus ride to the cave, she vomited once into a bag she had brought, told the passenger next to her it was motion sickness, and wiped her mouth. At the cave entrance, the guide looked at her and asked if she was all right. She was pale and had already sweated through the back of her shirt on the walk from the bus. She told him she just needed a minute and that she was fine. He offered to let her wait at the entrance with the bus driver. She said she hadn't come all this way to sit outside. He gave her an extra water bottle, kept her in his line of sight, and the group moved in. By the halfway point, she had drifted to the back and was visibly struggling to keep pace. Another tourist walking near her asked if she needed to stop. She shook her head and kept moving. She was drinking from the water bottle, but not nearly enough given how much she had already lost since the night before. At around 950 feet into the cave, the guide paused the group in a wide chamber he used as a standard rest point. Claudette sat down on a rock formation without being asked. The guide crouched beside her and could see her skin was clammy, her lips dry and cracked, and her hands were shaking. He handed her water and told the group they were taking 5 minutes. She drank slowly. When he signaled the group to move on, she stood up, took 2 steps, and went down sideways without stumbling or reaching out to catch herself. She just dropped and hit the cave floor without bracing herself at all. A tourist with basic first aid training knelt beside her and found a pulse that was weak and irregular. She was breathing but shallowly and did not respond to her name. The guide's radio signal was poor at that depth, So he sent the strongest member of the group running back toward the entrance on foot while he and the tourist began CPR after her pulse disappeared approximately 8 minutes after she fell. It took the runner 22 minutes to reach the entrance and another 19 minutes for emergency responders to get to her location inside the cave with a stretcher. They couldn't bring her back. She was carried out and transported to a regional medical facility. Her husband was reached by the ship's guest services team while the ship was still docked at Belize City. He was taken to the facility by port staff. Resuscitation efforts continued at the facility before she was pronounced dead. He was the one who identified her. The post-mortem blood work showed severely depleted potassium and signs of significant dehydration throughout. The terminal event was ventricular fibrillation, the heart losing its rhythm and not getting it back. The coroner's report connected the dots. Years of daily diuretic use had kept her potassium quietly on the low end. The stomach illness drained what was left overnight, and a morning of hiking through a humid cave finished it off. Her husband confirmed she had been sick the night before and that he had told her to stay on the ship. The guide's records showed he had flagged her twice and offered her the option to wait at the entrance. The excursion operator was not found liable. Every single person in that story who tried to slow her down got a lie instead of an answer. On a Gulf of Mexico crossing, a rough seas advisory cleared out an entire dining hall, and a woman chose to stay simply because she hadn't finished her meal yet. It was November 17, 2016, and the ship was on the return leg of a 10-day Western Caribbean itinerary, roughly 310 miles southeast of Galveston in the Gulf of Mexico. The weather had been building all afternoon, swells getting bigger, the ship rolling in that slow, heavy way that makes you grab the handrail without thinking. By early evening, the captain issued a formal rough seas advisory over the intercom, and crew began clearing the main dining hall on Deck 5. The hall had floor-to-ceiling windows along the port side, and by that point, the water outside was dark and visibly rough. Phyllis Kipling was 63, a retired school librarian from Columbus, Ohio, on the trip with her daughter and son-in-law. She had been diagnosed with mild osteoporosis 2 years earlier after a routine bone density scan and had never mentioned it on any health or excursion forms. She had spent 40 years being the authority in the room, and clearly she had no interest in giving that up. Phyllis had stayed behind in the dining hall after her family went back to the cabin. She was midway through her dessert when a crew member came over and explained the captain's advisory clearly. Conditions were getting worse and passengers needed to clear the area. Phyllis looked up from her plate and told him she hadn't finished eating and that the ship had been rocking all day without any issue. He explained again that this was a formal advisory from the captain and not a general suggestion. She put her fork down, looked at him, and told him she had been on plenty of cruises and knew the difference between rough seas and something worth interrupting her dinner over. She told him to send the captain her regards and went back to her dessert. He logged the interaction with a timestamp and kept moving. Within a few minutes, every other table in the dining hall had cleared out. The lights over the empty tables, the windows rattling on the port side, and Phyllis sitting alone finishing her meal. At 7:31 p.m., 17 minutes after the advisory went out, Phyllis had actually left the dining hall with her family. She made it halfway down the corridor before she stopped. She had left her cardigan on the chair and told her daughter she wasn't about to have a crew member fetch it for her like she couldn't manage it herself. Her daughter told her to leave it. Phyllis turned around and went back in. She was back inside when the ship took a sharp roll to starboard. A wave struck the port bow and the whole room lurched hard to one side. Phyllis had just reached her table when the roll hit. It threw her sideways, her right side catching the edge of the table next to her with significant force before she went down to the floor. A crew member heard the impact and reached her in about 30 seconds. She was conscious and talking, but said she couldn't feel her hands and couldn't move her arms. Nobody moved her. The medical team arrived with a cervical collar and backboard and kept her completely still. She had no movement or sensation below her shoulders. The ship altered course toward the nearest port. She was stabilized in the medical bay and airlifted to a trauma facility about 4 hours after the incident. Her daughter was notified while still on the ship and flew out to meet her at the facility. She was with her when she died 38 hours later. Imaging confirmed a complete fracture and dislocation in the middle of her neck with total spinal cord damage. That level of injury progressively shuts down the ability to breathe independently, and her daughter made the decision to withdraw mechanical support. The osteoporosis made it worse in a specific way. Her bone density was low enough that it took significantly less force to produce that fracture than it would have in someone without it. The crew member's log was part of the official report, time-stamped, with her exact words about knowing the difference between rough seas and something worth interrupting her dinner over. The cardigan detail came out in the investigation, confirmed by her daughter. The cruise line was not found liable. Sometimes letting someone help you is all it takes. Phyllis couldn't quite manage that. She had already made that choice once at the table. The cardigan was just her making it again. For the last one, we're in Grand Cayman in 2016, and a woman on a kayaking excursion saw a jellyfish swarm ahead and paddled straight into it. It was April 22nd, 2016, and the ship had docked on the western shore of Grand Cayman just after 8 a.m. The kayaking excursion launched from a small beach near the port into open coastal water about half a mile offshore. Flat surface, light wind, good visibility. Cressida Mabry was 52, a marketing director from Charlotte, North Carolina, on a 7-day Caribbean cruise with 2 work colleagues. If Deb Felker was reckless and Phyllis Kipling was stubborn, Cressida had spent her career finding ways around problems other people said couldn't be solved. Well, that works great in a boardroom, but on the open water, not really how it works. Being told what to do by a kayaking guide in Grand Cayman was not something she had any interest in entertaining. A Portuguese man-o-war is not actually a jellyfish. It's a colony of individual organisms that work together as one creature. The float you see on the surface is just the visible part. The tentacles hang below, sometimes stretching dozens of feet down, and they stay venomous even when they break off and drift on their own. From a kayak on the surface, you are seeing maybe 10% of what is actually there. About 20 minutes into the paddle, the guide spotted a cluster of man-o-war ahead, that unmistakable blue-purple float sitting on the surface across a stretch of water in front of them. He called the group to stop and told them they were heading back. Cressida asked if they could go around. He explained that the tentacles ran far deeper than anything visible from the surface, and there was no safe way through. She said she had been stung before, and it was fine. He told her the call was not up for discussion. Every other kayak in the group started turning. Cressida told him she had paid for a full hour and wasn't going back early over some jellyfish. Then she just started paddling forward on her own. She had gone about 80 feet ahead when her left paddle dragged through a cluster of submerged tentacles that snapped back across her forearm, hand, and calf. She pulled her arm back and called out that she had been stung. Within 90 seconds, her voice changed, and she called out again that she couldn't breathe. Here is what nobody on that water knew, including Cressida. 3 years earlier, a wasp sting had sent her to an urgent care clinic in Charlotte with hives, throat tightening, and blood pressure low enough that they kept her for 4 hours. An allergist confirmed hypersensitivity to insect and marine venom and prescribed an epinephrine auto-injector. She filled it. She carried it most of the time, not out of fear, but because she was practical. She had not brought it that morning. It was in the cabin, safe back on the ship. By the time the guide reached her, she was hunched forward, lips going blue, breathing in a high-pitched wheeze you could hear across the water. He pulled alongside to stabilize both kayaks and radioed the second guide. Within 40 seconds, she tipped into the water. He was in after her immediately and had her face up within seconds, but she had already taken water in and was unresponsive. They got her to the beach and started CPR. She never responded. Emergency services took her to a medical facility on Grand Cayman, where they worked on her for another 35 minutes before calling it. The post-mortem was straightforward. The prior wasp sting had sensitized her immune system. When the man-o'-war venom hit, her body treated it as a known threat, airways swelling, blood pressure collapsing, faster and harder than it would have in someone without that history. The immersion finished what the venom started. Epinephrine in the first 2 minutes might have bought enough time. There was none on the water. There was one in the cabin safe 11 miles away. The guide's radio log and every witness account lined up. The operator's safety review came back clean. Her 2 colleagues were the ones who identified her at the facility. Neither of them had been on the water when it happened. 30 years of being the smartest person in the room. How does someone like that not learn to listen?